If you want to read your draft profile, just some of the comments here. You're coming out of Purdue, and these are some of the things said about you.
So tends to sidearm his passes going deep. Lacks accuracy and touch on his long throws. Seems more comfortable in the short intermediate passing attack. Does not possess the ideal height you look for in a pro passer.
There we go.
Oh, what? Will improvise and run when the passing lanes are clogged, but tends to run through defenders rather than trying to avoid them to prevent unnecessary punishment. The sidearm and lacks accuracy, and he's too short, and then he's just ultra physical and wants to truck people as opposed to juke them. That's always been my MO since I was a kid. I mean, why try to juke the guy when you can truck him? You know what I'm saying? I mean, give the fans what they want to see, you know? The NFL draft process for me was kind of crazy. I was committed to get my degree. I still had, I think, about 15 hours left. So I was going to school in the mornings, and then I was coming in the afternoon, and I was training. And so I went to the combine. Didn't have a great showing at the combine. You know, I think I was so focused on some of the physical elements, you know, all the things that I felt like they were doubting me. I felt like I had to prove something with my 40 time and some of the other things, and I really didn't throw the ball that well. Kind of kicked myself after.
He didn't have a really good combine, and he's a much more well-rounded athlete than he showed at the combine that year, so that didn't help him at all.
I had followed Drew Brees as far as some guy up at Purdue putting up these amazing numbers as far as a quarterback.
You look at the numbers that he put up, and then you say, okay, well, he's not quite as athletic as we think he is, and he can't do this and he can't do that very well. And now all of a sudden you do look at him and say, okay, this might not be a guy who's real. Those numbers might not translate because he might be more of a system player than he is a great quarterback.
He's not going to be a guy that's the 6'4", 6'5", tall quarterback. Then you start looking at some of the numbers and it's like, man, that's impressive. You know, this guy has been able to throw for this many touchdowns and produce this many yards as a quarterback, but the first thing, your first impression is, nah, he's not going to be an NFL player.
Who cares about this other stuff, man? It's how you throw the ball, and then it's just that personal contact you have with the coaches and who you are and what you stand for, and you know, when you're watching the tape, your football knowledge, your football acumen, and just you know, your leadership ability. From that time until the draft, which is about 3 weeks, you're just sitting there in limbo. You know, you have no idea what's going to happen.
They began gathering outside the theater of Madison Square Garden before the sun came up. Fans of all teams trying to get in to watch Michael Vick. 5 other of the top players like LaDainian Tomlinson.
The Chargers, I knew had a big interest, but they were picking #1. So I really didn't think the Chargers were, I know I'm not going to get drafted #1. And
yesterday afternoon, the San Diego Chargers and Atlanta Falcons swapped the #1 pick of the draft. The headline is, the Atlanta Falcons have an opportunity to select Michael Vick.
Michael Vick, Michael Vick, Michael Vick.
He's the only guy you remember about that draft a lot. I mean, he was a phenomenon.
You know, people were just enamored with Michael Vick. He had a phenomenal game against Florida State in the Sugar Bowl down in New Orleans, and that kind of elevated him of how he would translate into the NFL.
He had a great arm, he could run, and you figured if you're an NFL team, you can put some pieces around him and hopefully teach him to be a better pocket passer, or just let him do what he does naturally, and still that will be good enough for you. He was that good a prospect.
With the first selection in the 2001 NFL Draft, the Atlanta Falcons select Michael Vick, quarterback, Virginia Tech.
I think the Chargers played it extremely well. They needed a quarterback, yes, and they probably figured we can get one later. They had to have LaDainian Tomlinson.
With the 5th pick, the San Diego Chargers select LaDainian Tomlinson, running back from TCU.
Drew and I, both of us being from the state of Texas, we actually played in the same All-Star game. And we met there for the first time, and we became big friends.
This will add an elite runner. And North Turner, Chris, has had a Pro Bowl running back in 6 of his last 10 years. And 5 of those years, he also had a Pro Bowl quarterback.
I mean, I can remember sitting down with Charlie Weiss, who was the offensive coordinator for the New England Patriots, and they were picking #6. And they were seriously thinking about taking me. So I thought, okay, well, it could be New England. And I remember Jacksonville having a huge interest.
Jacksonville Jaguars select Marcus Stroud, defensive tackle from Georgia.
I remember Kansas City Chiefs having a big interest. I remember the Seattle Seahawks having a big interest.
The Seattle Seahawks have chosen guard from the University of Michigan, Steve Hutchinson.
So just before draft day, I remember Joe Tiller kind of pulling me aside and saying, hey, I've got a really good friend who's a scout for the Dolphins, and they are sitting at number 26, pick number 26 in the first round. And he says, if you're there, they are taking you. I realized at some point when all the other teams have chosen that, you know, Miami's the only one that's left. And so, waiting for pick number 26, thinking it's going to be the Miami Dolphins.
With the 26th selection, the Miami Dolphins have chosen defensive back from Wisconsin, Jamar Fletcher.
I started looking at the teams after them in the first round, and all of them had quarterbacks. So, well, it's not going to be any of those teams.
But at the time, you looked at it and said, okay, this is probably about where you would think Drew Brees might go.
And then I see the first pick of the second round, and that is the San Diego Chargers.
I think it's a perfect opportunity for San Diego to bring someone in young. We talked about Vick learning under Doug Flutie. Brees can do the same thing.
They had showed a ton of interest, and I felt like I had a great rapport with them. Norv Turner was the offensive coordinator. Mike Riley, the head coach, had some great visits with them, great meetings. They had come to my pro day and just seemed very, interested. And then they were sitting there at the first pick of the second round. And
with the first selection in the second round, number 32 overall, the San Diego Chargers have selected quarterback from Purdue, Drew Brees.
There's some Charger fans here, some Seattle jerseys, Tomlinson and Brees.
And I had heard about Drew from my time in high school. I heard about this big-time quarterback at Austin Westlake, and so I knew about him. I'm not sure if he knew about me, but we followed each other through college and went to some of the same banquets that you go to in college. And we actually spoke about being on the same NFL team when we were at one of those banquets our senior year. And ironically, it happened. It was an amazing day for both of us to be drafted by the Chargers.
I think the thing that stood out the most was that the Chargers were able to move back in the draft, get the running back they wanted, LaDainian Tomlinson, and then still have enough freight to maybe get a quarterback in the second round. We thought that they might want a quarterback in that draft, and that's why everyone was thinking that they might take Michael Vick at number 1. When they moved back, you figured, okay, they'll probably try to get one later in the draft, and it just so happened that they were fortunate enough that he was sitting right there at the top of the second round.
And the most important thing is ending up in the right place, with the right team, the right system, the right group of people where you can grow and mature and become the player that you aspire to be. And I felt like San Diego was the perfect place at that time for me. Doug Flutie had been signed to be the starter, who was, a huge childhood hero of mine, watching him play, watching the Hail Mary when I was 5 years old, and just all of his accomplishments and just all that he had overcome. He was a gritty, in my opinion, I think Doug Flutie is one of the best quarterbacks to ever play the game at any level, because he played at a high level at a ton of different levels, right? From college to USFL to CFL to NFL, you name it. And he's still one of my great friends, and I learned so much from him by playing with him. Not a more competitive person on this earth than Doug Flutie.
Well, Drew was a great teammate. He was very supportive of Doug Flutie. And he took the approach of, listen, I just want to learn as much as possible from a guy like Doug Flutie, who has been in the National Football League for a long time.
I think it was a great thing for Drew because Doug had just had so many experiences to talk about. As plays were being maybe installed or talked about, Doug could reflect on his own experiences. And listen, Drew, he takes in every word, he hears it, and he's able to relate it to the game.
So I get drafted 2001. Really to come in and back up Doug Flutie and be mentored by him. And the San Diego Chargers had been 1-15 the year before. So it was nothing but up from there, right? So we actually start off 5-2 in 2001, and Doug is rolling, playing great. Doug gets a concussion in the next game. I end up playing a lot and play pretty well, but hey, I'm a rookie and made rookie mistakes and was just kind of, flying by the seat of my pants out there. But we ended up losing 9 consecutive games after that, so we finished 5-11. Marty Schottenheimer came in and opened it up to a competition between Doug and I to be the starting quarterback for the 2002 season. I ended up winning that starting job, so I started, and we went 8-8. We had 1-15 to 5-11 to 8-8. Here we were going into the 2003 season with all kinds of expectations. Here we were, we had gotten a little bit better each and every year. Now we were poised to finally make that leap. We had a really tough season. We finished 4-12. I was benched 3 times during that season. Was benched for a 5-game stretch at one point, for Doug.
Flutie was a Hail Mary prayer that maybe he could turn it around, but that was a team with a lot of issues, had a great young running back in LaDainian Tomlinson, had some good pieces on defense, but they really hadn't coalesced.
Man, you talk about tough on the ego, tough on the confidence. For me, that had never happened to me before. I'd never been benched, never even thought that would ever be a possibility, and yet that's reality. That's life. You're not getting the job done, you're not going to play.
Drew Brees at that point was still a very unproven quarterback, and he would certainly not solidify his position.
So I learned a lot from that. I learned a lot when I had to stand on the sideline and watch it from that vantage point. But I learned so much, and when I stepped back out there, I felt like a different person and a different player. So that was where I was now going into the 2004 season.
The Drew Brees of 2003 was a guy whose interceptions were outnumbering his touchdown passes. He was a smallish quarterback, did not seem to have extraordinary arm strength. They had the #1 pick, and they had a #1 pick because they were a last place team with Drew Brees at quarterback.
The front office was looking at it as Drew Brees may not be our guy. We need to go out and get another guy. And because we had finished so poorly with our record, we had the first pick in the draft.